Hey guys, tonight we dive fork first into a question nobody asked, but now you can't stop thinking about. What did Alexander the Great eat every day, and did it make him stronger? You picture him glistening in bronze armor, leading armies across deserts and mountains, and then awkwardly hunched over a wooden bowl of lentils like a tired intern on meal prep Sunday. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, drop your location and local time in the comments so I know which corners of the world we're quietly conquering tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into a Macedonian army camp still warm from the fires of conquest. Dust clings to your sandals. Your legs ache, and you'd give anything for a soft cushion and anything that isn't lentils. But here it is again. The bubbling pot, the murky stew, the wooden ladle dishing out portions with all the enthusiasm of a bored prison cook. You sit cross-legged with the others. The air smells like damp earth sweat and burnt olive oil. Dinner tonight is the same as yesterday. Lentils stewed with a few shavings of dried onion, chunks of stale goat cheese, and crushed coriander seeds if someone got lucky with a spice merchant last week. There's bread, too, well, a disc of something bread-like. It's flat, rock-hard, and has a faint scorched aftertaste like someone toasted it on a spear tip. This was fuel, not pleasure. Lentils were the legume of the common Macedonian soldier. They were cheap filling, and according to some ancient beliefs, good for producing stamina and grit. Historians still argue whether lentils were genuinely believed to fortify courage or just happened to be the cheapest protein option when marching through Persia. Sometimes a bit of barley was added, turning the whole bowl into a sad porridge that made your jaw ache. Salt was precious, and most meals tasted like damp cardboard, which, if you're being honest, is probably more appealing than whatever's crawling near your boots right now. And yet, Alexander ate this too. Not always, but enough to maintain the image of unity. You remember watching him once, no golden goblet or jeweled plate, just the same wooden bowl as you steam curling from his ration. He sat among his men, hair tied back, eating slowly, eyes locked on the map beside him. His silence filled the space like a sermon, and suddenly your lentils tasted better, like maybe you were part of something bigger than your own appetite. Every so often, someone in the camp would try to spice things up literally. A traveler brought cumin seeds from a market. Another stole garlic bulbs from a passing village. You'd toss them in and call it Macedonian fusion. The result, more gas than glory, but still it broke the monotony. There was one strange incident you remember vividly. A soldier claimed eating raw onions before battle made him more fearsome. He'd chomp into them like apples, tears streaming down his face, daring others to follow. Whether it made him brave or just gave him horrifying breath is still up for debate. Historians are split on whether such spicy bravado had any real tactical value, and let's not forget the drink. There's always wine, thin sour and diluted with water until it tasted like grape-scented sadness. But it was a step up from the brackish well water that tasted like boiled boots. At least the wine killed off a few questionable microbes. Maybe. You lean back, bowl now, empty stomach only half full. The fire crackles. Across the camp, a few men are roasting chestnuts over the embers, trading stories, their laughter thin and tired. One man hums a tune from home. Another polishes his blade with crusty bread. You close your eyes and let your mind wander. Was this daily diet building strength? Probably not in the way you expect. It wasn't magical. It didn't pack protein like a Roman gladiator's barley and bean shake, but it kept the engine running. Barely. And more than the food, it was the shared routine, the repetition, the ritual, the resilience that shaped Alexander's men into something terrifying and legendary. Because strength, you realize, isn't always about what's on the plate. Sometimes it's about what you endure between meals. You wake to the sound of armor clinking and meat sizzling in unusual luxury in camp. The air smells different this morning, smokier, richer. Word spreads fast last night was a victory, a decisive one. And that means only one thing on this expedition feast day. You shuffle toward the makeshift fire pit, rubbing your eyes. What you see makes your stomach rumble and your eyebrows rise. Spitted goats turning slowly over coals, fat dripping into the flames with satisfying pops. A boar carcass has already been split, its ribs splayed out and blackened. And someone, probably a show-off from Thrace, is roasting what looks suspiciously like a peacock feathers still tucked behind one ear like a trophy. Victory meals aren't common, but when they come, they hit like a lightning bolt to your palate. Suddenly, it's not about rations, it's about reward. Goat meat, tough but gamey and satisfying, reminds you you're alive. You tear into a leg with greasy fingers, letting the warmth coat your insides. No bowls today, no lentils, just meat fire and the smell of something that feels almost like luxury. Historians still argue whether Alexander personally enjoyed these feasts or merely tolerated them to keep the troops happy. Some sources say he barely touched his food, focusing instead on speech's strategy and ensuring the men saw him as disciplined even above indulgence. Others insist he dug in with gusto, especially when exotic meats were involved. After all, when you've conquered half the known world, why not try roast ostrich once? But the real star today isn't the meat, it's the mood. There's laughter now, singing, someone's beating a drum with a bone. The peacock guy is dramatically slicing meat and handing it out like a priest offering blessings. You're handed a flat cake soaked in fat and honey probably borrowed from some nearby Persian kitchen. You devour it in 4 bites and regret nothing. Still, not everything's delicious. One of the cavalrymen offers you a skewer of something he claims is mountain rabbit. You taste it and strongly suspect it's a very lean dog. You smile anyway. He looks proud. It's not the time to ask questions. And then comes the wine, stronger today, darker, less diluted. You sip carefully. The last thing you want is to wake up with your sandals in a tree and no memory of how they got there. Around you, soldiers get rowdy. One starts reenacting yesterday's battle using 2 greasy drumsticks as swords. Another composes a song about a fallen comrade but forgets the words halfway through and switches to humming. And Alexander. You spot him at the center of it all, not quite part of the chaos, but not apart from it either. He eats modestly, tearing bread with calloused hands, sipping wine without flourish. His plate is cleaner. His meat more precisely cut, but he makes sure the men see it. He eats what they eat. His quiet presence says more than a speech ever could. You remember a story an old mercenary once told by the fire that after a major battle, Alexander had invited the wounded to a private feast, feeding them first before taking a bite himself. Whether it's true or battlefield legend, you can't say. Historians debate the moment's authenticity, but tonight, watching him, you believe it. As the night deepens and bellies fill, the laughter slows. Fires crackle lower. Meat bones litter the ground like battlefield remains. You lean back full in a way that's rare on this march. Full not just of food, but of something quieter. Fellowship, maybe. or the rare certainty that for one night you weren't a hungry speck in a vast, uncaring empire. You were part of something even if it tasted like overdone boar. You brush crumbs from your tunic, tuck the last bit of flatbread into your satchel for breakfast, and let your eyes flutter shut to the sound of soft singing and the crackle of dying flames. The morning is quiet, but not still. There's always movement in the camp. Horses shifting armor being buckled distant, barking from a dog that seems to survive on dropped bones and sheer attitude. You groggily reach for your canteen, only to find it filled with wine. Again, you stare into the thin violet liquid. This wasn't the sweet nectar of gods. It was wine for war, watered down, sharp, barely better than vinegar. And yet you drink, because it's safer than the water, and because, like everyone else in Alexander's army, you're slightly dehydrated, sunburnt, and oddly willing to believe that a little fermented grape juice counts as hydration. Wine wasn't just for celebration. It was an everyday staple, diluted, rationed, and passed around like bitter communion. You sip it slowly, half hoping your kidneys forgive you. Somewhere nearby, a soldier complains it tastes like moldy raisins soaked in leather. He's not wrong. And yet, historians agree, wine was central to Macedonian and Greek life. They rarely drank it pure. That was for barbarians, or so the philosophers claimed. A respectable man watered his wine, sipped it slowly, and used it to lubricate conversation or fuel quiet reflection. Or, in your case, to forget you haven't eaten fruit in 3 weeks, and your last bath involved a rainstorm and a sarcastic goat. Still, it wasn't all bad. Sometimes in richer cities, the army got access to better vintages, sweeter, thicker, even spiced with herbs or resin. You remember one evening in Phoenicia where the wine was so strong a man tried to duel a shadow. He lost, spectacularly. There's an open debate among scholars about whether Alexander truly limited his wine intake, or if those stories were crafted to make him seem more disciplined than he was. Plutarch wrote that he drank sparingly. Others suggest he indulged especially after long campaigns using wine to cement bonds or soften the edge of grief. You once watched him host a symposium, half-military briefing, half-group therapy with goblets. There was meat, of course, and dried figs, olives slick with oil, and plates of cheese crumbling into soft lumps. But the wine, he used it like a tool. Every sip a signal. Pouring it for an officer meant trust. Ignoring your cup meant you'd better rethink your loyalty. That night, you drank just enough to stop caring that your feet were bleeding and your tent had been eaten by termites. You learned the rhythm, drink, eat, laugh, pause. And then always Alexander would say something that made everyone quiet. A quote from Homer, a question about legacy, a simple, chilling line like, "What will they say about us in 2,000 years? Probably that you drank too much wine and fought a lot. But hey, at least they're still talking." There's a weird theory you once heard from a cook in camp that the wine in certain regions had healing properties. Not magical, but medicinal. The vineyards of Asia Minor, he said, produced wine that made your wounds hurt less and your dreams more vivid. Whether it was true or just fermented hope, you didn't care. You filled your canteen with that wine when you could. And yet, it wasn't the wine itself that mattered. It was what came with it. A moment of stillness, the illusion of comfort, the rare luxury of tasting something that wasn't beige or boiled. You didn't drink to forget. You drank to pause. Now, with the sun creeping higher and your breath sour with morning regret, you take another swig. It burns, not in a comforting way. You wince and wish for something simple, clean water maybe, or a plum, or a mouth that doesn't feel like it's been scrubbed with sand. But you shake it off, pack up your gear, and move on. Because Alexander's already moving, and if he's not stopping, neither are you. Not for wine, not for comfort, and certainly not for a hangover. You didn't think you'd ever miss goat, but here you are standing in a lavish Persian hall, stomach churning, nose twitching from spices you can't name, staring at a plate so decorative you're not sure if you're supposed to eat it or worship it. The food in Persia, it's different, richer, sweeter, fragrant, suspiciously beautiful. Gone are the gray stews and beige porridge of your Macedonian past. Now you're staring at jeweled rice glistening with saffron cinnamon and orange peel, dates stuffed with crushed nuts and honey, lamb so tender it falls apart when you breathe near it. You raise a bite to your lips and pause. This doesn't taste like war. This tastes like indulgence. Alexander had conquered Persia by this point, and with it came a transformation not just of politics and borders, but of dinner. The court culture was lush, elaborate, and designed to impress. Every meal was a display of wealth, power, and prestige, and Alexander, ever the chameleon, adapted quickly. Some accounts suggest he was initially hesitant, clinging to his simpler Macedonian habits. But as weeks turned into months in Persia, his meals changed. He started adopting Persian customs, eating, reclining, wearing silk, seasoning his food more boldly. Some of his soldiers grumbled. They missed the old days, the rough bread, the sense that they were all equals in discomfort. Historians still argue whether Alexander truly went native, as his critics said, or if he was simply being strategic, winning loyalty by showing respect for local culture. Maybe both. But one thing's clear, his appetite changed. You remember the first time you tried Persian sweet wine, thick syrupy, infused with rose water and spice. It clung to your throat like perfume, but you couldn't stop sipping. The honeyed figs that followed made your teeth hurt. You licked your fingers anyway. Then came the stews, slow-cooked lamb and pomegranate molasses, eggplant roasted until smoky and soft flatbreads so thin they folded like silk. You started dreaming about food again. Not just craving it, fantasizing, planning. There was a dish the locals called fesenjan, a dark, rich stew of walnuts and tart pomegranate usually served over rice. One night, you watched Alexander taste it for the first time. His eyes widened. He nodded. No words, just a grunt of approval. That was how you knew it was good. But with richness came risk. A general once fell ill after a banquet, vomiting for hours. Rumors swirled. Poison spices gone bad. Historians are still debating whether Persian cuisine made Alexander stronger or softened him. Did the luxury slow him down? Did the indulgence chip away at the grit? You think about that as you chew a sticky square of candied melon and try to ignore the voice in your head that misses lentils. Simpler times, fewer stomach aches. Still, there's no denying the strength and variety. Your body began to feel sharper after a week of fruits, herbs, and meat that didn't taste like sadness. Your energy returned. Your skin cleared. You even started smiling more, though maybe that was just the rosewater haze. One night, Alexander invited a group of Persians and Macedonians to dine together. It was awkward. The locals reclined on cushions. The soldiers sat stiffly. The Persians sipped date wine with delicate fingers. The soldiers poured it like soup and chugged it like they were dying. But the food made them talk. It bridged the silence. You're pretty sure someone proposed a toast in 3 different languages that night. As you sit now, wiping honey from your beard and sipping tea so bitter it makes your eyebrows twitch, you realize something strange. The food hasn't just changed your meals, it's changing you. You're more open, more curious, less judgmental about things like cinnamon and meat or tea that taste like burnt grass. And maybe that's what Alexander saw too. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was diplomacy, assimilation, power. When you eat like your enemy, you stop seeing him as other. You start seeing him as someone who also likes apricots. You lean against a tree, chewing a piece of barley flatbread that tastes like old sandals and regret. The feast from Persia still lingers in your memory, spiced meats, soft fruit, sticky sweetness. But here, miles away from luxury, you're back to the basics. A philosopher, one of those quiet types who always smells faintly of scrolls and sandalwood, once told you that food defines the soul. Gymnasium fare, he called it, figs, olives, barley porridge. Simple food for a sharp mind, he said, tapping his temple like it was a wine barrel full of wisdom. And yes, you've tried the fig diet. Once, you felt clean for about 5 hours. Then, you nearly passed out trying to hoist a spear. Turns out, battlefield strength doesn't run on fruit and philosophy alone. This is the dilemma of the campaign. What's good for the mind isn't always good for the march. Greek thinkers advocated restraint. Eat to nourish the spirit, not the stomach. But war is messy. War is hunger. You needed calories that could fight. Still, there's wisdom in simplicity. The soldiers believed certain foods gave them specific traits: onions for bravery, garlic for vitality, barley for stamina. Whether it worked or not, no one questioned it. Because when you're marching 15 miles a day, an armor belief can be more filling than bread. Historians still debate whether the Macedonian army's diet was truly optimized or merely a product of availability. There's no denying that what you eat shapes how you fight, but was Alexander building an elite fighting force through nutrition, or just keeping them alive with what was on hand? You think of the royal advisors, the soft-handed men who whisper about moderation and balance. Meanwhile, you're trying to balance a shield, a spear, and a knapsack full of legumes. Moderation isn't really an option when you're burning more calories than a modern marathoner. But then, there are days, long exhausting days, when someone in camp produces something special. A few almonds tucked away in a pouch, dried dates, a handful of raisins. Suddenly, the morale shifts. You remember that you have taste buds, that life isn't all iron and leather. You once heard Alexander talk about Homer's Odyssey, about the lotus eaters, those who forgot their purpose through sweetness. He said, we must eat to remember who we are. You weren't sure if he meant it literally or just liked sounding mysterious. Either way, he still chewed with the same tired jaw as the rest of you. And every so often, you'd glimpse his plate, modest, disciplined, but curated. A little of everything. A boiled egg, a soft fig, a spoonful of stew. Not gluttony, not deprivation, just balance. As if his food choices were part of the myth too. Some nights around the fire, the veterans whisper about Alexander's secret rations. Special herbs from Asia. Dried berries believed to increase stamina, exotic nuts that only the inner circle received. Truth, exaggeration. Historians can't agree, but the whispers made you wonder if you were chewing the same crusts, or living in his echo. You look down at your current meal, cold lentils, half a flatbread, and something that might be an olive or a pebble. You eat anyway. Because in the end, the stomach doesn't care about philosophy. It cares about not folding on the battlefield. Still, a little fig wouldn't hurt. You're crouched on the edge of a campfire, eyeing 2 meals being served side by side, one for you, one for an officer, just high enough in rank to get second dibs on the good stuff. It's a quiet moment of envy, the kind that sneaks up between spoonfuls of gruel. Your stew is watery, its color best described as uncommitted beige. A few lentils float among mushy carrots, and the chunk of meat in the center might be goat or might be optimism. You chew and pretend to enjoy it. Next to you, the officer's plate is different, cleaner. The vegetables actually look like vegetables. His bread has that soft, fresh quality you haven't felt since the last time you were within 100 miles of a bakery. His olives are whole, his cheese isn't gray, and that little cluster of dried fruit that's just showing off. Royal rations weren't extravagant by modern standards, but compared to what the rest of the army ate, they were practically gourmet. Alexander made a point of appearing humble eating with the troops often. But, let's be honest, he had options. When you're a king, you don't wait for goat bones to be boiled 3 times before you get soup. Historians still argue over how often Alexander really shared the soldiers' fare. Was it all performance, or did he genuinely prefer the camaraderie of eating with men who bled beside him? One account describes him refusing lavish Persian dishes in favor of barley bread. Another tells of him sampling delicacies in Babylon while others starved. Maybe both are true. Maybe he chose when to be symbolic and when to be satisfied. You've heard about the royal kitchen, 3 wagons full of portable cooking gear, exotic spices, and enough dry stores to host a diplomatic dinner on a mountaintop. The head cook was treated with more reverence than most junior commanders. Food, after all, could smooth over failed negotiations faster than any silver-tongued envoy. You once snuck a look inside one of those royal supply crates. Inside, sesame oil and clay jars cured meats wrapped in leaves, fragrant herbs from Egypt, and flatbread packed in linen. You stared like a starving child at a temple altar. And yet, for all the fancy fare, Alexander was selective. You remember one night after a brutal desert crossing when he was offered a dish made from sweet melon soaked in palm syrup. He gave it to a wounded scout instead, said it would taste better in victory. That line was repeated for weeks, embroidered on memory recited like scripture. There was a silent understanding among the men Alexander could eat better. The fact that he sometimes didn't, that he occasionally sat in the dirt dipping old bread into the same oily stew as you, mattered more than whatever actually ended up in his bowl. Still, you'd kill for that fig cake he got yesterday. One of the cooks tells you between ladles that Alexander once banned rich food during a campaign not out of piety, but because it slowed the troops. Heavy spiced meat made soldiers sluggish. Too much wine led to arguments. Too much comfort dulled ambition. So what you got was functional barley dried meat, lentils cheese, if you were lucky wine that could strip paint, and hard bread that doubled as a blunt weapon. But you learned to adapt. You found joy in small victories, a particularly smoky piece of meat, or a surprise sprinkle of coriander. You invented a game with your tent mate where you tried to guess what animal you were eating. Loser had to clean the cookpot. Food became more than sustenance. It was morale. When rations were short tempers flared. When a fresh batch of onions arrived, songs were sung. One man swore by his mother's stew that pickled garlic made him run faster. You tried it. It didn't. But you appreciated the optimism. So here you are again, scraping your bowl clean as your neighbor delicately wipes olive oil from his fingers with a cloth napkin. You catch each other's eye. He shrugs. You both laugh. Then he offers you the last fig from his plate. You take it. And in that soft, sweet bite, somewhere between envy and camaraderie, you realize that the difference in meals might separate roles, but it didn't always divide hearts. The sand feels different here. Softer, finer, almost like flour, You step carefully, watching your shadow ripple along the temple walls of Egypt. The sun's still high, though the air's cooler than you expected. And today's meal, if it can be called that, is served in silence. The priests offered it without fanfare. Flat bread pressed thin as parchment, and a small bowl of lotus root stew. No meat, no wine, no seasoning. Just food made for gods or those pretending to be them. Alexander stands nearby speaking to one of the high priests. He looks almost reverent. You can't tell if he's praying or negotiating. The Egyptians call him a son of a moon now. Divine by right, chosen by fate. You chew slowly and try not to choke on the irony of eating sacred starch while your stomach screams for something fried. This isn't camp food, it's ceremonial. And in Egypt, that means symbolism baked into every bite. The bread, round white unrisen, represents purity. The stew, made from lotus root and river herbs, was served to royalty in the afterlife. You take another bite and wonder if that's where they went, because the flavor is definitely deceased. Historians still debate how seriously Alexander took Egyptian religion. Was he playing along for political reasons, or did he actually believe? Did he see himself as divine, or just willing to eat what was necessary to keep the priests happy? You think about that as the priests watch you from beneath their shaved heads and ink-dark eyeliner. Their gaze isn't cruel, just curious, like they're trying to decide whether you're a soldier or a walking stomach. One priest kneels beside you and hands you a fig split and drizzled with something sweet. You nod in thanks. It tastes better than anything you've had in days, sweet, sticky, slightly fermented, maybe holy, maybe just overripe. Then someone brings out beer. Not the kind you know. This is thick, grainy, more like soup than drink. It smells faintly of bananas and bread. You sip it, grimace, then sip again. It grows on you, probably in the microbial sense too. You've heard tales of Egyptian workers being paid in bread and beer. Maybe that's the point here. This is foundational food. Fuel. It might not lift your soul, but it keeps your feet moving. Alexander seems contemplative today. He doesn't eat much, just a few bites of the sacred bread. He talks to the priests about the stars, the afterlife, the Nile. You watch him and realize something strange. He looks smaller here. Not weaker, just humbled, as if Egypt isn't conquered but quietly absorbing him. You tear another piece of bread and chew slowly. The flavor is bland, but the texture is perfect, soft, warm, with a crust like scorched silk. You start to appreciate the subtlety. You think maybe you've been on the road too long if you're getting emotional over flat bread. A fellow soldier whispers to you, "Did you know Egyptians used to put food in tombs for the dead to eat in the afterlife?" You nod. He continues, "I hope I get honey cakes in mine." You both laugh, but part of you wonders if your afterlife will be just more lentils. There's a quiet wisdom in the way the Egyptians eat. They don't gorge. They don't season aggressively. They respect food like it's a language. You realize you've been shouting with your appetite for years. Here, you're learning to whisper. By sunset, the priests are gone. The fires are out. You lie back on a woven mat belly, not quite full, but strangely content. There's a stillness to Egypt that's hard to explain, like time folds in on itself here. And maybe that's what Alexander felt. That food wasn't just fuel anymore, it was ritual. It was identity. It was a way of being remembered, not just fed. You close your eyes, the taste of fig and barley still on your tongue, and for the first time in days you don't feel like you're chasing something. You feel like you've arrived. You're in a palace now, not a dusty camp or windswept valley, but a real palace, with polished floors, scented torches, and ceilings so high they seem to float. This isn't just dinner. This is theater. There's a long table of food stretching farther than your arms ever have in battle. Roasted birds stuffed with herbs, bowls of golden rice flecked with dates, and pistachios, pyramids of fresh bread stacked like monuments. And at the head of it all sits Alexander, not as a general, but as a living myth. Tonight's menu is political. You're not here to eat, you're here to be seen eating, sharing meals with conquered kings, toasting old enemies, laughing at jokes translated across 3 languages. You raise your goblet because that's what everyone else does, but you sip carefully. The wine is too sweet, the air too still, and your instincts tell you the real flavor here is strategy. Alexander learned early that food isn't just sustenance, it's symbolism. Historians still argue whether his most famous banquets were expressions of power or desperate gestures for unity. One thing's clear, he made meals into messages. You remember the banquet in Susa? It was enormous, 10,000 guests. 10,000. Macedonians, Persians, Greeks, Egyptians, each given a place at the table. Alexander wanted harmony, they said. A new world order written in bread and wine. You sat beside a man who once tried to kill you. You passed him the salt. That night, Alexander married a Persian princess. He wasn't the only one. He ordered his officers to do the same. Love, loyalty, or logistics, hard to say. But the food that night, you'll never forget it. Saffron lamb, jeweled couscous, and spiced fruits served on polished platters. It was less of a meal, more of a wedding ring shaped like a kebab. You glance around this banquet and catch something strange. Alexander isn't eating much, just small bites, careful sips. He smiles, but it's calculated. His eyes dart from guest to guest like a commander watching terrain. Every clink of a goblet, every murmur in a foreign tongue, it all becomes part of the war effort. A servant brings you something wrapped in fig leaves. You unwrap it gently and discover soft goat cheese mixed with mint and crushed walnuts. You take a bite and suddenly feel very uncivilized. You try not to groan out loud, but not everyone at the table is pleased. Some Macedonians eye the exotic food with suspicion. Too soft, one mutters. Too Persian. Others refuse the pomegranate syrup outright, asking for wine the proper way, bitter-watered masculine. There's a tension here. You can taste it between bites. Culture clashing with conquest. Soldiers grappling with identity. Alexander embracing a world they still don't understand. Still, you play along. You lift your glass when he does. You laugh when the Persian prince laughs. You eat the syrup-soaked apricot and pretend it doesn't make your jaw twitch from the sweetness. Because here, food isn't just what you consume, it's how you're judged. Somewhere in the back of the hall, musicians play something slow and unfamiliar. The flicker of torchlight turns the plates into little mirrors. Everything looks golden. Everything smells of honey and ambition. There's a story whispered that night. Alexander once invited a group of Indian philosophers to dine with him, but they refused, saying, "Wisdom cannot sit with hunger for power." He sent food anyway. They didn't eat it. Historians debate if it happened. You believe it. Mostly because tonight, surrounded by silk-draped strangers and flavors your tongue barely recognizes, you're not sure who's really being fed the body, the myth, or the memory. You leave the table full, but not satisfied. The meal was beautiful, ornate, a symphony of texture and fragrance, but you miss the rough bread of the camp, the noisy fire, the simplicity of eating with people who didn't want to impress you. Still, you understand what Alexander's doing. He's feeding a dream one where East and West dine at the same table, where the battlefield is replaced by the banquet, where history is rewritten with each carefully plated dish. You don't know if it'll work, but you'll eat the fig leaf cheese again just in case. The river glistens like a serpent in the dusk, winding lazily through the gates of Babylon. You're sitting cross-legged on a woven mat, squinting at a skewer of something. It's been grilled, it's vaguely fish-shaped, and it's staring at you. Welcome to Babylon, land of enchantment, astronomy, and culinary gambles. Tonight's dinner is what the locals call a little bit of everything. River eel, dates stuffed with spiced lamb eggplant, roasted in ash, and something that might be apricots, though they're oddly tangy and suspiciously chewy. You take a cautious bite and brace for adventure. The first taste is shockingly pleasant, sweet smoky layered with cardamom and garlic. Then the aftertaste arrives and it's like licking a bronze coin. You chew through it with dignity, because at this point you've eaten worse. Much worse. Babylon was a city of excess gleaming walls, perfumed courtyards hanging gardens maybe, and food that could both nourish and betray you. One general insisted the pickled garlic here had anti-aging properties. Another swore the spiced yogurt cured his back pain. You suspect they were both hallucinating from the fermented dates. Historians still argue about how much of Babylon's cuisine Alexander embraced. Some sources say he welcomed it with open arms, experimenting with local delicacies and inviting Babylonian chefs into his camp kitchens. Others claim he kept a simpler fare, wary of exotic dishes and potential poison. Given Babylon's history of sudden royal deaths, both approaches seem wise. And then there was the bread. Not flat and dry like Egypt's, not crusty like Macedonian loaves, but pillowy, fragrant, laced with sesame, and occasionally filled with nuts or chopped figs. You once ate 4 in a row, then blacked out from joy. Or possibly the wine. Speaking of wine, Babylonian wine was notoriously strong. Dark, thick, unfiltered. It came in clay jugs sealed with wax and a warning look from the server. It didn't need dilution. It needed discipline. You remember Alexander once drinking it straight during a banquet. He claimed it sharpened the senses. 2 hours later, he declared a wrestling match in the middle of the hall. Some scholars say that night was the turning point when Alexander's grip on discipline began to loosen, softened by indulgence. Others insist it was calculated a performance to outmatch the opulence of Babylon's past kings. You're not sure. All you know is that he definitely didn't win that wrestling match. You glance back at your meal. The eel is gone. You think it was eel. Now you're poking at a bowl of cooked barley mixed with honey and nuts. It's surprisingly comforting, like a dessert trying to disguise itself as rations. But the problem with eating in Babylon wasn't just taste, it was survival. Rumors of poisoned dishes flowed more freely than wine. Everyone eyed their plate with suspicion. Alexander had food tasters. You had blind faith and a strong stomach. One of your comrades once claimed he saw a cook drop a beetle into the stew pot, stir it, and mutter something about extra protein. No one argued. You've eaten stranger things in less glamorous places. You remember walking through the marketplace, spices wafting through the air, sizzling street food, tempting even the most iron-willed. A vendor offered you fried locusts glazed in pomegranate syrup. You laughed. Then you tried one. Then you bought a whole pouch. Because that's Babylon for you. Mysterious, excessive, strangely delicious, and always a little bit dangerous. Alexander understood this. He didn't just conquer cities, he absorbed them. Food was part of the process. sharing a dish with local nobles, learning the names of ingredients, letting Babylon seep into his blood bite by bite. Was he growing stronger? Hard to say. His muscles were leaner now, his eyes sharper but darker. He moved like a man carrying the weight of every spice he'd ever tasted. But there was something different in him. Less conqueror, more collector. As for you, you've developed a weird fondness for apricot lamb and fermented yogurt. You no longer flinch at the sight of mysterious skewers. You drink the dark wine, slowly, savoring its warmth like an old friend. And you wonder if food tells a story of a man. Then, what does Alexander's plate look like now? It's a question best chewed over slowly. Preferably not while eating suspicious eel in a city known for poisoned kings. The table is shorter tonight and the fire quieter. There's no grand banquet hall, no string of roasted animals turning on elaborate spits. Just a low wooden table in a tent that smells of leather and ink with guards posted outside and a strange silence hanging in the air. You're not sure if you've been invited for a meal or a negotiation. Opposite you sits an old enemy, former enemy, a satrap whose lands you marched through months ago. Back then, you wouldn't have shared a road with him, let alone a plate. Now, you both lean over the same dish, boiled lentils with chopped leeks and a wedge of soft goat cheese dusted with herbs. It's a simple meal, which somehow makes it more terrifying. Because nothing says careful now like breaking bread with someone who once tried to stab you in a canyon. Food, you realize, is no longer about hunger. It's about trust. Or at least the appearance of it. The bread between you is warm, torn by hand, offered palm up. He eats first. You follow. There's no dramatic toasts, no ceremonial daggers tucked in food. But every motion is calculated. Each bite is a small ceasefire. Alexander knew this well. He orchestrated meals like symphonies, each guest a note in his vision of unity. Historians still argue whether these diplomatic dinners were idealistic peace offerings or cold political moves dressed in spice and linen. You think it was both. That's what made him brilliant. You've seen him dine with kings and rebels alike. Sometimes he listened more than he spoke. Sometimes he asked odd questions about farming, about the local harvest, even about how the bread was baked. Other times he said nothing at all, letting the food speak for him. Tonight reminds you of one of those early banquets in Egypt when a priest refused to eat until Alexander took the first bite. A small test. Alexander didn't blink. He ate, smiled, and handed the priest the second serving. Whether he was proving trust or just hungry, the gesture worked. There's a tension in these shared meals. The line between diplomacy and deception is butter thin. You've heard tales of poisoned olives, tainted wine dishes dusted with strange powders. One officer, paranoid beyond reason, insisted on trading meals with a servant every night. He died of infection, not poison, but the rumor lived longer than he did. Tonight's dish rice with herbs, chickpeas, a drizzle of oil is actually pleasant. It's warm, fragrant, comforting in its humility. You talk about the weather, the state of roads, how strange it is that the moon looks the same from both your homelands. You don't mention the burned village or the cousin lost in a skirmish. That's not dinner talk. You glance at Alexander, seated a few feet away with his generals. He's not eating much. He rarely does at these things. He's watching, always watching, gauging the room like a general surveys a battlefield. Not for weak points, but for cracks that might be softened with wine and slow smiles. One of the strangest things you ever witnessed was a dinner where no one spoke the same language. Alexander sat at the center surrounded by tribal leaders, merchants, emissaries from distant kingdoms. The food did the work. Bites passed, hands gestured, laughter bubbled out when someone got pepper in their nose. Somehow it worked, and that's the magic. Meals like these transform people from enemies to guests, from strangers to temporary allies. It doesn't last forever, but for a moment, you're just two humans sharing calories and stories. You sip your wine, it's light tonight, barely fermented, the kind that doesn't start fights or fog the brain. Your companion offers you a dried fig from a small pouch tucked into his robe. You accept. It's chewy and sweet, and for a second you forget everything you've seen on this campaign. Then a dog barks, a plate clatters, the moment passes. You nod, and so does he. No handshakes, no declarations, just a full belly and a truce stitched together with grains and quiet. As you rise, you realize something odd. Food didn't change the world tonight, but it paused it, and sometimes that's more valuable. The wind bites harder up here. You've climbed for days into the crags of Bactria, where the mountains seem too high even for the gods. There's no fire tonight, no wine, just cold fingers, aching legs, and the distant howling of something that doesn't sound like it wants to be your friend. You rummage through your satchel and pull out what remains a piece of dried mare's milk cheese, hard as a pebble, and a few roots that someone swore were edible. They taste like damp bark soaked in disappointment. Welcome to starvation. This is the part of the campaign historians don't dwell on, the stretch where the glorious march east becomes a daily struggle not to collapse. Supplies don't reach this far. Roads vanish. Even animals start looking worried. You remember the day you ran out of salt. The stew went from barely tolerable to culinary war crime. The men grumbled morale wilted, and one officer tried to flavor his soup with powdered charcoal. It worked if the goal was to stop eating altogether. Alexander didn't escape the hardship. His rations were barely better, and he refused to take more than his men. One evening, a soldier brought him a helmet filled with precious water after a brutal desert crossing. Alexander looked at it, thanked him, then poured it into the sand so no one else would feel envy. You watched it happen, and your throat hurt more from emotion than thirst. Historians still argue whether that moment was real or legend. But you saw the way it spread through camp. You saw men cry over spilled water and then march another 10 miles with blistered feet. Up here in Bactria, food becomes currency. A strip of dried meat can get you a favor. A single fig is cause for celebration. You once saw a man trade a whetstone for an onion. Not a fancy one, just an ordinary dirt-covered onion. They cooked it like it was a sacred relic. And roots, always the roots. Bitter, starchy, sometimes vaguely toxic. You learned which ones made you sick and which just made you regret being alive. A local villager showed you how to boil them with a pinch of ash to dull the bitterness. It worked. Barely. One of your comrades swears he killed a snake, roasted it over coals, and said it tasted like lemony chicken. You tasted it. It tasted like regret wrapped in scales. But somehow, through all this, you grew tougher. The hunger sharpened, you made every decision matter. You ate slowly, deliberately. You felt every bite echo through your ribs. You stopped wasting food. Even the crumbs became sacred. One night, as you huddled under a blanket stitched from horsehair and stubbornness, Alexander joined your group. He didn't say much. He just sat, tore a piece of dry bread, and shared a chunk of his cheese with the youngest soldier. That soldier cried. Moments like that changed things. You weren't just starving in the mountains. You were starving with him. The myth was cold and hungry too. It's easy to romanticize these stories. But the truth is, you were constantly calculating, Can I make it to tomorrow? Will this route kill me? Will Alexander march us straight into the sky? And still, somehow you believed. Maybe because he kept going. Maybe because he ate what you ate. Or maybe because by this point you were too far in to do anything else. You gnaw on your mare's cheese. It tastes like salt and sorrow. But it's food. And in Bactria, that's enough. Tomorrow, you might find a stream. You might stumble across a patch of wild berries. You might finally learn to like that soup made from boiled leather straps you won't. But for now, you sleep on rocks with roots in your gut and frost on your breath, dreaming of lentils. You sit on a slope overlooking a dusty valley, knees tucked to your chest, chewing the same barley biscuit you've carried for days. It's stale, chipped at the edges, and smells faintly of horse. But still, you chew, because today you're thinking less about taste and more about why you eat at all. Did food make Alexander strong? You've marched beside him, eaten the same gruel, the same dried roots, and occasional figs, and you're still, you tired sore, extremely not a legend. He meanwhile seems to gather momentum even on an empty stomach. Maybe it wasn't the lentils, or the goat meat, or the wine. Maybe it wasn't even food at all. You flash back to one of the earliest days of the campaign. Alexander had a cracked lip, a bruised eye, and blood on his tunic, not from battle, but from sparring. He hadn't eaten much that day, just olives and a crust of bread. But his energy filled the air like lightning. Strength, you realize, doesn't always come from calories. Sometimes it's pulled from belief, from the people around you, from purpose. Food keeps the body upright, but something else pushes it forward. Historians still debate the source of Alexander's endurance. Was it his carefully managed diet? His elite upbringing? A freakish metabolism paired with ambition that burned hotter than his stomach? They list possible answers like ingredients, royal wine, wild honey-trained discipline, occasional ego. But there's no recipe that explains it. You once watched him go nearly 2 days without eating during a siege. He paced the ramparts, consulted maps, sharpened his dagger. At one point, he accepted a fig but tossed it to a child nearby. Later, he said, later never came. The city fell. The fig was forgotten. But the moment stuck with you, not because he skipped a meal, but because he knew when not to eat. There's power in restraint, the kind that turns a man into a symbol. Alexander didn't need a feast to feel strong. Sometimes strength came from refusing what was offered, from showing his men that hunger was part of the path. But he wasn't immune. You remember the banquet in India, the elaborate spread, the jeweled plates, the peacock feathers fanned behind the musicians. That night, Alexander indulged. He drank deeply, laughed loudly, ate 3 courses and asked for more. And the next morning he was slow to rise, heavy-eyed, quieter. He knew it too. That same day he ordered lighter rations, cut the wine, increased the marches. The indulgence had dulled the edge. He missed the hunger. You finish the biscuit. It's like chewing sandstone, but it fills the silence. Around you, the men rest their food, mostly gone. Some chew strips of dried pomegranate skin, pretending it's meat. Others just sleep hands on their stomachs, dreaming of bread that doesn't crack teeth. And Alexander. He's further up the slope alone, eating something wrapped in leaves. A local delicacy, probably. You doubt it's filling. But he eats slowly, methodically, like it's not about food, it's about control. You wonder how he does it, whether he's secretly starving or if the hunger has become part of him now. Something fused into the spine, not the stomach. Because that's the thing, isn't it? You eat to survive. Alexander eats to lead. He shows restraint when others feast. He shares when he has less. He starves with you in the mountains and then shares plums in the desert. It wasn't the meat that made him strong. It was the message behind every bite. And now, as the stars creep over the sky and your belly settles into its usual emptiness, you don't envy his meals. You envy his ability to make every meal mean something. You close your eyes, and the ache in your gut fades just a little. Because tonight, hunger isn't weakness. It's a sign that you're still marching, still part of something, still following a man who turned eating into a kind of magic. The sun is directly overhead, and everything shimmers the sand, the armor, even your fingernails. You've stopped marching for a moment, not because you wanted to, but because the heat has made your bones feel like clay, and the horses are starting to look at you like you might taste better than the hay. The last water skin passed down the line was empty. The one before that leaked. And now you're parched, dizzy, and trying to remember if you ever actually liked wine or if that was just a myth you invented during colder times. And then, out of nowhere, a wineskin lands beside you. Still cool somehow. Heavy. You glance up, and there he is, Alexander, covered in dust shirt, half-buttoned expression unreadable. "No water today," he says almost apologetically, "but this will do." He walks on. You stare at the wineskin like it's a sacred relic. Half of you wants to drink it. The other half wants to build a shrine and light candles made from goat fat. You unscrew the top and sniff sour familiar, slightly metallic. It's watered down, of course, but your lips still tremble when you sip. It burns a little going down, but it wakes something up inside you. A flicker of defiance. A reminder you're still moving. Historians tell that story often. The day Alexander refused water while his men were thirsty, accepting wine instead so no one would feel denied. Some say it happened in Gadrotia, others in the deep Persian desert. Some say he drank. Others say he didn't. Scholars still debate the details like it's a recipe. You don't care. You were there. You remember the look in his eye, equal parts fire and fatigue. That moment became a kind of legend in your unit. The day you drank wine instead of water, and somehow it made you stronger. But wine doesn't actually hydrate. You knew that. Everyone knew that. Your mouth was still dry. Your sweat still vanished before hitting your skin. But morale. That went up. It bloomed like a stubborn flower in a cracked jar. Because what mattered wasn't what you drank, it was who gave it to you. Later that evening, when a water convoy finally arrived and soldiers rushed to fill their skins, no one mentioned the wine. But they remembered. You kept that wineskin, empty, flattened, tied to your belt like a lucky charm. Some men carved it with the date. Others filled it with sand to remind themselves what survival tasted like. It's strange, the things that stick. You've marched through cities where people threw petals and offered fruit platters bigger than your torso. You feasted on golden rice and dried lamb. But nothing felt more powerful than that one hot, sour sip of shared suffering. Alexander knew what wine meant. It wasn't just a drink, it was a choice. He could have hidden in shade ordered chilled citrus water in golden cups. But he chose the same bottle you drank from on the same scorched road. And something shifted after that day. The men walked taller, complained less, ate their dry bread like it was cake. Not because they were full, but because they weren't alone in their hunger or thirst. You still felt the ache. You still dreamed of shade-cool grapes, a bath that didn't involve sand and curses. But your spirit stopped shrinking. The myth was marching beside you again. One soldier started calling it the vintage of resolve. You rolled your eyes at first. Then you started saying it too. You lie back now under a sliver of tent cloth strung between two spears, remembering the cool weight of that wineskin in your hands. You touch your lips and swear you can still taste its sunlight iron and a whisper of something ancient. And as sleep circles you like a quiet predator, you remember this sometimes: strength isn't forged in the belly. It's sipped in silence between the cracks of survival. It started with a feast. Not the usual kind. No rustic fires, no shared barley stew, no under-seasoned goat meat passed around like treasure. This was a royal feast. Draped in gold, swimming in spices, the kind of spread that made generals whisper and servants sweat. You remember the table, long, shimmering, heavy, with plates carved from dark wood and bronze. There were figs glistening and honey peacocks roasted whole and stuffed with herbs, sweet wine, thick as syrup, and pomegranate seeds scattered like jewels across everything. The room pulsed with heat and perfume and the buzz of conquest. It was Babylon, the last great city, the last great feast. Alexander sat at the center of course, half lit by torchlight, half swallowed by shadow. He was laughing that night genuinely for once, not the hollow public chuckle, but the belly-deep kind you'd only heard when he sparred with old friends or found a story that actually surprised him. Everyone remembers what he ate that night, or they think they do. Some say he favored the fig cakes. Others claim he consumed large quantities of spiced wine too much. There's a rumor he refused food entirely, saying he wasn't hungry, just thirsty. A few swear he drank chilled citrus water laced with saffron. Historians still argue whether his final feast killed him. Was the wine poisoned? Was it the meat, the figs? Or was it something older, something deeper? A body worn thin from years of hunger, stress, sleepless nights, and slow poisonings of a different kind, ambition, grief, endless war. You didn't notice anything strange at first. He looked tired, yes, leaner. His eyes carried more silence than usual, but he laughed. He ate. He spoke of cities he'd never seen and rivers he still wanted to cross, and then the meal ended. That night he fell ill. Some say it was immediate pain slicing through him like a blade. Others say it was slow. Fevers, delirium, whispers in languages no one understood. You weren't in the room when he collapsed, but the news moved faster than fire. You remember the fear that bloomed around the edges of camp. Men stood in corners whispering about figs gone bad, wine too sweet, a cook who disappeared before dawn, a servant who swore he saw a scorpion crawl from a wine jug. You remember the silence that followed. Alexander bedridden. No appetite, no orders, no myths, just a pale man surrounded by worried generals and unopened platters of food. One soldier, weeping, left an offering at the temple steps, his last piece of dried apricot wrapped in cloth. To strengthen him, he said, "You watched, said nothing, and clutched your own stale rations tighter. Because what do you offer a god when he starts to look like a man?" The last recorded meal, if any, was modest. Some say he was spoon-fed barley gruel. Others claim he refused everything. Some stories insist his final request was wine unwatered, straight from the jug. One tale, clearly more prayer than fact, says he asked for a single fig bit into it and smiled. You don't know the truth. Maybe no one does. Maybe the food wasn't poisoned. Maybe the feast wasn't even his last. Maybe what killed him wasn't dinner at all, but everything he'd consumed over the years. The blood, the exhaustion, the weight of 1,000 meals eaten on foreign soil. Whatever the truth, it ended quietly. No thunder, just the fading of appetite, the greatest conqueror of the known world lying beneath silken sheets too weak to chew. You sometimes wonder if he had lived longer. What would he have eaten next? Would he have found new dishes in India? Sat at tables built by cultures yet unknown to him? Or was this always the last bite? You reach into your satchel and find a fig. It's wrinkled soft, saved for a day when you needed to remember something. Tonight feels right. You take a bite, it's sweet, too sweet, and you chew slowly, staring at the darkening sky, tasting the weight of legacy. You sit alone tonight, a flickering candle, your only companion. Around you, the camp has quieted. No laughter, no clanking armor, no bawdy songs from half-drunk soldiers. Just the low murmur of wind slipping through the tents and the soft rustle of memory settling in. You reach into your pack and pull out a wrapped bundle, a collection of small things saved over months, a fig dried to near paper, a hard wedge of goat cheese, a heel of barley bread. Bits and pieces from long marches, long nights. It's not a meal, it's a museum. And you begin to wonder if Alexander were here now, what would he serve you? You imagine the plate, simple but precise. A wedge of fresh cheese, soft bread baked that morning, honeyed fruit arranged like little suns on a rim. Maybe a strip of salted meat marinated with something he picked up in Persia. A dollop of date paste, and water clean cold poured in silence. It wouldn't be opulence, it wouldn't be a feast, it would be deliberate. A tasting menu of legacy. Food always meant more to Alexander than nourishment. It was ceremony, power, peace. It was how he bound cultures, earned trust, demanded loyalty. One meal could win a city. One missed meal could start a mutiny. Historians now sift through fragments, shopping lists, camp records, temple offerings, trying to guess what he liked, what he avoided, what he chewed slowly, and what he devoured in battle-hardened silence. Some claim he was mostly vegetarian. Others insist he favored meat, drank milk from mares, indulged in honeyed pastries after victories. Every theory tells a different story. You remember watching him once after a long march when the men had nothing but barley gruel and bitter herbs. He walked among them, took a bowl without a word, sat cross-legged in the dust, and ate. Slowly, thoughtfully. Not because he needed the food, but because you needed to see him eat it. That was his strength. Not the sword or the crown or the endless cities he renamed after himself. It was the way he turned the mundane meal sips, bites, into something meaningful, something binding. He never said it outright, but you understood. To conquer a world, you had to eat with it first. And now, so many years later, you still taste it. Every time you break bread, every time you sip wine with suspicion, every time you share a fig with someone and think this is how it begins. You lie back on your cot candle flickering low. You chew the last of the bread stale but warm from your breath. It tastes like dust and dreams. And you smile, because the story wasn't just about what Alexander ate, it was about what it meant. And now you carry it forward one bite at a time. Word count 1070. Wind down final 300 words. And now, as the last echoes of firelight flicker out across your memory, you feel your body settle. The hunger has softened. The journey has ended not with a feast, but with understanding. You let the sounds of the past fade gently behind you, the clang of utensils on bronze, the crackle of boiling pots, the murmur of men swapping stories over scraps of cheese. Even Alexander's voice, sharp, commanding, suddenly quiet, dissolves into the warmth of the night. You feel your limbs grow heavier now, each muscle unwinding like parchment in the sun. The weight of bread and legacy slides off your shoulders. The figs are gone. The wine is finished. But something else lingers, a sense that you were there, that you marched and feasted and starved beside history. That, in the quiet act of eating, you found strength not just to fight, but to remember. You breathe deeply. Cool air fills your lungs. The candle winks out. And in the silence, your heartbeat slows to match the rhythm of 1,000 years ago. One bite, one sip, one story at a time. Sleep now. You've eaten your way through an empire. And tomorrow you'll rise and taste the world again. Sweet dreams.